Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Archival Discourses. For this evening, I'm very lucky to be joined by my good friend Hunger. How are you, Hunger?
Doing all right. Little off my usual schedule because we're not discussing Ali Kaduri today, but we'll be discussing related topics and such. But very happy to be here today.
And we're supposed to have been joined by American Elitist, but he's running a little bit late, sadly. So he should hopefully be along not for too long. And our topic for this evening is a bit of a spicy one because we're dealing with the Zionist worldview, and pertinent because, as you may know, Hunger, that Israel's sterling invasion of Lebanon went swimmingly well, so they agreed a ceasefire after 1 month. And do you know how much territory they captured? Absolute fuck all.
Yep. Our greatest ally, bravely entered the battlefield and won stunning victories by advancing 500 meters and scattering the enemy and then leaving. And that's all she wrote. 500 meters. Woo.
And I know, I remember, of course, you had a war monitor. I remember when it was like, a Zionist terrorist has been slain, a Zionist terrorist has been annihilated. And I was like, okay, a bit spicy. But something that I thought was quite, dare I say, tragic was because he was sharing like names and faces of some of the alleged Israeli soldiers who'd been killed, and it was like, this dude's like 21, this guy 23, this guy 25-year-old major, and I'm like, Israel
Lieutenant Colonel, 26
Yeah.
years old.
Oh, yeah, so I was a bit skeptical, but thinking if this is true, then Israel are just throwing like their youth away like it's nothing.
I mean, you have to also take into account that most of the Israeli troops are reservists. They're not full time. They're not contract soldiers. I mean, they do 2 years of mandatory military service, and then they just go back to being civilians. But they can be called up at any time, just like in America we have the National Guard. But yeah, so they have military experience, but they're not contract professional soldiers. So I mean, it's not surprising. Like there's the derogatory name for them is weekend warriors. That also exists in the British military as well.
I have heard that expression, and yeah, and the thing is, in my view, you call those sorts of people in if your country's like under attack and being invaded. You don't. I wouldn't really use them for like invading another country, but Israel thinks differently for some reason.
I mean, they don't have a lot of manpower, and they're not very much known for for their martial virtue as a people historically.
Well, perhaps the
If
alleged,
they weren't fighting, if they weren't fighting the Arabs, like they would be a D tier European military. No offense.
yes, and I think the last year has really dispelled the illusion of the elite Israeli military. But enough banter about the about Lebanon. So why did I get the idea for the stream? Well, as some people watching may be aware, there is this fellow on Twitter, somebody who used to kind of, I guess, be part of the old skeptic community, somebody who AA's had on his channel previously, someone who I think Dave the distributors has spoken to in the past, a fellow by the name of King Crocoduck. And well, he is a self-described Giga Zionist. And if you don't believe me, I can show you. Here we go. King Crocoduck, Giga Zionist. I've written an extensive critique of Daryl Cooper's martyr-made podcast series on the origins of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so myself and Hunger and AE, when he joins us, are going to be reading through this wonderful article tonight and getting an insight into the Zionist worldview. And given he's called himself a Giga Zionist, I think we know what his take is going to be.
Yes, me and King Crocoduck have had some back and forths on Twitter, and has it? Yes, I would say he's just as cringe as you imagine a Giga Zionist would be. So there's that.
No, certainly, and I have to say, it's in some part of me, Hunger, it's very jarring to see this guy who was kind of like a centre-left, anti-SJW science guy who taught the AA back in the day on UO is now just like this frothing like Israeli nationalist.
I mean, you can guess what his ethnicity is, obviously. But yeah, no, I remember him in the 2017, unpopular opinion era, and he would just seemed like a reasonable dude. But apparently, this is his, ethnic narcissism coming out, and he's going to tell us why Palestinians don't exist? Question mark.
Yeah, and one other thing I just want to share before we read through it is something you've reposted. Yep, so here we are. We've got just don't say the quiet part out loud challenge, impossible. And it's a tweet from Auron. There's a quote, we should all have dual loyalty to Israel. Yeah, let's watch this clip. It appears to be the Daily Wire, because we've got good old Shapiro.
People are always accusing Ben of having dual loyalty. They're accusing Jews, but Ben as being a king of the Jews. They
Lowercase k.
It occurs to me that we should all have a dual loyalty to Israel because it is the place that God hallowed with His presence, and it is like still the living presence is there. If you've ever been there, it is, and it's like that. Even St. Paul says that God is not done with the Jews. God is not done with the Jews.
At least,
people.
Yep, so we should all have a dual loyalty to Israel, apparently.
I mean, I don't know what else to add. the quiet part out loud is at max volume. Just like come on, dude, come on. Like the lack of self-awareness. It doesn't even shock me at this point. I'm just like, oh, okay, this is just what they do. They just tell you straight up, and they have no idea what they just said or how it'll be interpreted by other people. But yeah, that's also a continuing trend. And just to address one thing, Kate J in the chat, yes, King Crocoduck's discussion with Dave on Zionism was that was a train wreck. Which I very much enjoyed because Dave is a savage at dissecting arguments. But yes, that was definitely a difficult thing to watch as well.
Well, Dave, he loves to debate his crazy leftist now, doesn't he? But now I guess he likes to debate crazy Zionists as well.
We should have queued up the Dave in the straitjacket. Just one more bread tuber. I swear that'll be the last one.
But who is this bald guy anyway?
That's Andrew Klavan. He's a host on the Daily Wire. I mean, of all the people at Daily Wire, I mean, I haven't watched Daily Wire in fucking like 6 years. I haven't watched Daily Wire since 2017, but I like Klavan the most. Like I would love to have a beer with that guy, but he is Jewish. How he was born Jewish, raised Jewish, but later on in life as an adult he converted to Christianity. I think he's an Anglican. Works in Hollywood. Very good writer, actually, very good fiction writer. But he's a convert to Christianity from Judaism. So I mean, obviously he's going to have positive opinions about Israel and our Judeo-Christian values.
Ugh. And according to Vingle, Burden has had Klavan on his show. Apparently, I didn't know that.
Burden has been on Klavan's show. Actually, I did watch that. That came out a few months ago. It was very good.
Oh,
it was like a boomer whisperer episode. Like just a little edgy right-wing talking points, like trying to explain to your boomer parents, like slightly shifting the Overton window a bit to the right. But no, like Klavan is an interesting, fun dude. He's just retarded when it comes to Zionism because he's obviously comes from a Jewish background, which I don't fault him for.
And good friend A.R. Shaitori. Good evening, my fellow Emperor Titus enjoyers. But what about your Emperor Hadrian enjoyers?
Justinian's enjoyers in the house.
Yeah, but did Justinian have a problem with the tribe though?
No. No. Oh my god, that reminds me of the Eric Weinstein tweet when he was at the Wall of Hadrian. Do you remember that tweet?
No.
Eric Weinstein, so the brother of Brett Weinstein, he took a picture when he took a picture of Hadrian's wall, or no, not the wall. The I think it was the not the temple, like some monument to Hadrian. and he gave the statue
Oh,
like
I
a middle
remember that.
finger.
Oh, yes, I
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
that now. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, bruh, it's been 2,000 years. Get over it.
The butt hurt
The
never
arch, yeah,
ends.
Hadrian's arch. Yeah. I already mentioned it. No, these people can't let it go. They will hold a grudge intergenerationally for 2 millennia.
Never ending. Well, that's enough of that. Now let's get on to this fun article. Oh, hang on. That's okay. Right. Okay. So, critiquing Palestinian historiography, or the tragedy of Daryl Cooper's Palestinian wineskins. Let me make that a bit easier to read. And right. Okay. Introduction: the Vintner of Vignettes. Dal Cooper of the Martyr Made podcast has a lot going for him in terms of how he communicates historical narratives. He has a deep understanding of World War I, which makes sense given his obvious interest in how societal dynamics change in response to modernization, and the whole story of that conflict is how empires began dissolving into nation states. In his series on the origins of the Arab-Israeli conflict, Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, Cooper has a shop talk episode in which he explores how tribal and national societies differ, highlighting how the state apparatus replaces traditional family roles in interfacing with different aspects of life. That episode was a standout for me personally because of its clarity and breadth. He also has the powerful ability to command pathos with his vignettes of individual actors, such as the legend of Faisal al-Hashemi. If I recall, didn't we discuss him in one of the Chatham House episodes, Hashemi?
The name is familiar, but I can't recall.
I'm pretty sure he came up in the one we were talking about the government of Palestine. I can check later, but his name rings a bell. So Cooper breathlessly tells us about this extraordinary man who strictly abided by traditional Arab posting customs, honorably protecting the Pasha generals within his lands despite the tremendous military advantage that would have arisen from slitting their throats as they slept. His account of what it would have been like to be a Jew in an Eastern European pogrom, watching your neighbours suddenly turn on your friends and family, or an Arab during the Kafno famine, going to bed hearing the moans of starving people in the street through the open window, immediately places the listener in a trance-like state. When you listen to Cooper speak, you harbour in a space between life and death as you contemplate existence from the point of view of people who had, only moments before he began speaking, been nothing more than distant historical abstractions. Altogether, then, Daryl Cooper distills this fantastic vintage of historical narrative and deep sociological musing, a new and exciting wine for those of us who are curious about the past, and he proceeds to pour it all into the old wineskin of traditional Palestinian historiography. The result is predictable and tragic. The wineskin splits, and that is the underlying theme of the critique that follows. And so it's very interesting that he starts with being quite, shall I say, respectful towards Cooper, before he absolutely goes in and starts ripping him to shreds.
Yes, this is where he sinks in the knife. It's what's it called? It's what's it called? Compliment, criticism, compliment. That's how like, you know, corporate emails are structured.
No, absolutely. And sorry, I forgot to pin the entropy at the start, but if anybody wants to send a super chat, please do so via entropy, which I've now pinned. Right, so carrying on. The imitator of innovation. Let's begin by considering this word, historiography. We all know that history is not a list of events that happened and the order in which they occurred. That's mere chronology. History is a narrative you create by considering a representative subset of the evidence pertaining to those events and inferring causal relations to tell a story about what happened. Because of the politically fraught nature of such an enterprise, it's possible to tell a multitude of competing stories that each reflect the political agendas of whoever tells the story. To a cynical postmodernist, the story that wins out is a reflection of the agenda, whoever has the power to enforce their story. To an optimistic empiricist, there exists objective standards that all parties can agree to in the course of the adjudicating competing narratives. To some degree, both perspectives have their strengths, but now what's important to consider is the historiographic landscape of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. The historiography presented by Cooper reflects the Palestinian point of view, not a Palestinian point of view, but a Palestinian point of view. Okay, so his issue is that, oh, I don't have a problem with you talking about Palestinian issues, but why are you only talking about Palestinian issues?
It's not even that, because I mean, I I did read a little bit into the article. I did not finish the article because it was extremely long. But the point he makes when he says it's not a Palestinian point of view, it is the Palestinian point of view, is that his point of contention is that there are no competing. There is a monopoly on one view of Palestine and the Palestinian conflict. However, he says in the Israelis, the Israeli, like in the next sentence, the Israelis have a plurality of views. But when you talk to the Palestinians, they only have one narrative or point of view, and I don't think that's actually incorrect. I mean, when you look at the history of what happened to the Palestinians, it makes sense why they coalesced around one experience of what happened to them. I mean, it's like saying, how do I say it? Like, from the perspective of a murder suspect, there's only one point of view. They were murdered. However, from the killer's perspective, there could be multiple interpretations of why he did what he did. This is what King Crocoduck is going to be getting at.
And just want to address a comment. So Jules Roy, Cooper's very unreliable, possibly an outright grifter on the lookout for easy marks. I'm not that familiar with him, but that does seem a bit of a sweeping statement. I mean what I've seen about the Winston Churchill arc, which led to a lot of hot water for him, I just think he's quite a bold revisionist historian. I mean, do you agree with that sentiment, or is there any truth to him being a grifter?
No. I mean, is he unreliable? That would entirely depend on his sources, because Cooper is an amateur historian, and if he's citing the sources where he's getting this information from and putting his own interpretation on it, that I don't think that makes him unreliable. That doesn't mean Cooper's point of view is the end all be all. He is one interpretation among many that, from what I've seen myself, is pretty valid, and he cites, influential people and highly sourced people as well, on both the Israeli and Palestinian side.
So Jules Roy says, Cuba claims that Thatcher attacked the Falklands for cynical electoral purposes. I mean, she certainly benefited from victory in that conflict, but I mean, if he's saying that she just did it just for that reason, I mean, it's probably a bit narrow-minded, because, historical events are often multi-causal, they're not monocausal.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's probably, I mean, I wouldn't agree Thatcher did it for that reason, but it could, I mean, it did contribute to her to her re-election chances. Yes, it is not, like you said, not monocausal.
All right, okay. In contrast to Western, including Israeli historiographies, which are distinguished by their pluralism, the Palestinian historiography is characterized by its rigidity and stagnancy. This is as true for historians living in Palestine as it is for those living in its diaspora, like Rashid Khalidi or Nur Masala. Insular totalitarian societies like Palestine have an unfortunate tendency to violently penalize deviation from orthodoxy. I mean, is it fair to say Palestinian society is totalitarian?
No. It's not. I mean, if you want to compare it to gay liberal Tel Aviv, it would seem totalitarian, but it's not. I mean, I guess you can call it, like, it's not totalitarian in the North Korean sense. It's first of all, totalitarian is completely off the mark. That is completely an exaggeration. But before I address that, I just want to say one thing about, he mentions this historian, Rashid Khalidi. Rashid Khalidi wrote a book called, what's it called? I can't remember the name of the book. I think it's The 1,000-Year War in Palestine. I'm just gonna Google this really quickly, because I
think you're right. Isn't that a recent book as well?
The 100-Year War in Palestine. Yes. That's a recent one, but he's written many other books as well. But what Rashid Khalidi has done, and this is not controversial, is he has literally just interviewed thousands of Palestinians. Like, he didn't go into the archives. He interviewed Palestinians who were displaced and asked them what happened. what was your story? He did also go into the archives, but the basis of the book is, face-to-face interviews and in-person interviews about getting the perspective of the people affected by the Nakba. You can call that unreliable because individual testimony is unreliable, but he did this for thousands of people, and there emerges, a common narrative among all of them that they were kicked out of their homes by Zionist gangs.
Again, I just think the term totalitarian here, I think, is obviously just a pejorative, and he's, considering his Queen Crocoduck's ethnic background, he's clearly trying to make allusions to a certain mid-century regime, shall we say. Because I know later on in the article he does draw further links between a certain Haj Amin and Mustache Man. So let's carry on.
Yep.
Okay. If you're a Palestinian and you publicly question the basic assumptions of your society's historiography, like the idea that Zionism was a colonial enterprise, or that the conflict originated with the Balfour Declaration, and that previously Jews and Arabs lived together in peace, you run the risk of contracting an acute case of lead poisoning. If you're living in New York City and you've got people in Nablus or East Jerusalem, you need to be equally careful about what you write down in your books, lest you receive a phone call informing you about some very regrettable developments concerning your Zionist collaborator family. In contrast, Western historiographies are dynamic and varied. Israeli scholarship encompasses views ranging from pro-Palestinian, settler colonial narratives offered by the likes of Ilan Pappé to pro-Zionist tales of treacle heroism championed by Netanel Lorch, to everything in between, be it Benny Morris's unflinching new historiographic examinations of archival documents showcasing Israeli war crimes, Ephraim Karsh's impassioned defences of the old historiographic guard, or Anita Shapira's 30,000-foot narrative. Regardless of whose historiography you like best, you run the risk of being called a racist apologist for violence of some stripe or other. That's pretty much inevitable when discussing this conflict. But when browsing Western historiography, you can at least enjoy the benefits of cognitive flexibility and creative energy of the sort in which Palestinian historiography, with its stifled and static intellectual environment, is found lacking. So, from what I'm seeing thus far, he seems to be trying to, because from my understanding, I think King Kroc's background is in the sciences. So I think he's trying to sort of present himself as, I'm the rational, enlightened Westerner who belongs to this, fair academic, open-minded discourse, and Palestinians are just like these backwards, closed-minded reactionaries. So it's interesting he talked about lead poisoning. I mean, he's completely poisoning the world with this framing. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I would definitely agree. And he's saying, yes, there are Israeli historians who take up the whole breadth of the historical perspectives. There are pro-Palestinian Israeli historians. There are obviously pro-Israeli Israeli historians. The question is not about the breadth of the ideology. The question is, who is correct? This is that's not even a scientific point of view. It's we have so many diverging opinions. It's there's no diverging opinion on the truth. There is a historical reality to the events in Palestine. So, is Ilan Pappé correct? Is Benny Morris correct? Is Anita Shapiro correct? I don't know. I mean, I have my opinion on it, but if we examine these things critically, we can come to a conclusion about who is more correct, given the evidence that each person presents. Just because each person comes with a breadth of evidence does not mean there are multiple truths. There is only an objective truth that we are trying to reach. And which opinion in this, spectrum is closest to that truth? And he doesn't care that he's not King Crocoduck isn't saying, this perspective is the most true. It's no, we have the most flexibility. We have the widest, amount of perspectives. That doesn't mean 99% of them could be untrue. It doesn't matter how widely diverse they are.
And another point I would make is, Palestine, is a barely functioning state. Like, it's the Gaza Strip and occupied West Bank. They don't have the resources to, they don't have the same, educational or academic facilities that the Israelis do. So there's never going to be the same level of developed, discourse on this topic, is there?
I mean, to give to give the devil his due, I will say this: the Palestinian diaspora is not the people in Palestine. The Palestinian diaspora is extremely resourceful and extremely well educated. And when those Palestinian immigrants, like, who they're educated in the West, especially in places like New York City, all in Europe as well, it's like they receive an education, but the history that they received from their ancestors was that their family was victimized by the Zionists, kicked out of Palestine, and this is the reason why they can't go back home. So yeah, they're given that perspective from a very young age. He's not wrong when he says it's like, it's not, the word totalitarian is extremely loaded, and I completely reject its use here. But there is an authority passed down by your parents and grandparents who tell you the story of what happened to them and why they no longer live in Palestine. And those stories are completely valid and can be backed up by evidence, such as people like Ilan Pepe will demonstrate.
And to come back on this as well, it's interesting because I'm reminded of that famous binary service law, which is it's always projection with the left. Well, I think we could also use that on the Zionists. It's always projection with the Zionists, because I feel like he himself is blaming or accusing the Palestinians of what Zionists themselves are guilty of, because I would argue that they are very narrow-minded in their narrative. Because imagine if you belonged to a Zionist family and you tried to challenge this traditional view that, Israel is the chosen nation state and it has the right, God-given right to inhabit the Holy Land, etc., etc. You'd be just as much as ostracized as you would amongst a Palestinian family for arguing the opposite, would you not?
I'll give you two great examples. He mentions Ilan Pepe. Ilan Pepe was kicked out of Israel. He was born in Israel in the 1950s. German parents, European Ashkenazi parents, born in the 1950s, grew up in Israel, joined the IDF in the 67 war, became a historian in university, and rejected the Zionist thesis. And what happened? The minute Bibi Netanyahu comes to power, or the Likud party comes into power, in, I want to say 2009, Ilan Pepe is kicked out of Israel and can never come back. I don't think he was stripped of his citizenship, but he was exiled from the country for critiquing the Zionist perspective. Another person we just talked about a few weeks ago was the Iraqi Jewish scholar. God damn it, what's his name?
Avi Shlaim.
Avi Shlaim. Again, he's not welcome back in Israel. He's an Arab Jew, grew up in Israel, joined the IDF, fought in the IDF, became a historian, rejected the Zionist thesis, and he can't come back to Israel. Israel is the totalitarian state, because these people are not just enemies of the state, they're race traitors, because they're not Zionists.
No,
Israel is discouraging. Israel now, it's becoming a huge problem. Israel has been trying to discourage the immigration of anti-Zionist Jews into the state of Israel, and has been so for over a decade, discouraging specifically anti-Zionist Jews from immigrating to Israel because they reject the legitimacy of the state.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And what's this? Bingle. Blackpill did a good stream about how Yitzhak Rabin, Israeli Prime Minister, was assassinated during the time of the Oslo Accords for not being a Zionist and trying to make peace. Yeah, that sounds typical Israeli behavior.
I mean, he was a Zionist, but he wasn't insane. Like, he participated in the creation of the state of Israel. He believed that He just believed in the 1967 borders. He wanted to give up the West Bank and Gaza and form a Palestinian state. He didn't want to get rid of Israel. He wanted to maintain Israel along the original 1967 borders after the war in 1948. He was not anti-Zionist. He wanted a compromise with the Arabs. I mean, which is amazing. I mean, it's better than what we have now, and that was just too extreme for the Israeli right wing, and he was killed by a radical Likud supporter, Goldstein, I think his name was.
Well, it just gets better, doesn't it? But let's carry on. So, okay. Right, so regardless of whose historiography you like best, you run the risk of being called a racist apologist of violence of some stripe or other. That's pretty much inevitable when discussing this conflict. But when browsing Western historiography, you can at least enjoy the benefits of a cognitive flexibility and creative energy of the sort in which Palestinian historiography, with its stifled and static intellectual environment, is found lacking. The upshot is that when Western narratives are challenged by new information, they can adapt and revise, growing stronger than before. For example, there was little doubt that by incorporating the harsh realities of Israel's past, which old historians like Lorch have traditionally omitted, new historians like Benny Morris and revisionary traditionalists like Anita Shapira have strengthened the Zionist side of the argument. I mean, revisionary traditionalist, I mean, what does he even mean by that?
I don't take issue with that term. That might reflect a lot of perspectives on our side. Revisionary traditionalism.
Okay, fair enough. I can't help but feel he's trying to play a bit of word salad with this.
I mean, I would say, like, I just briefly, I would just say, what is the new information? What is the information that is strengthening the Zionist argument? Is there any new information strengthening the anti-Zionist arguments or the Palestinian arguments? He's taking this from a, bird's eye view, but not giving you any of the actual facts that would allow you to judge which situation is more true. I don't care about how many perspectives there are. I care about which one is true.
And I think ultimately what's left unsaid is the Palestinian narrative is wrong, basically, which is why he's saying there's got to be more diverse opinion.
Bullshit is more entertaining than the truth sometimes.
True. Okay. Right. This stands in contrast to the Palestinian narrative, which remains mired decade after decade in harshly enforced orthodoxy. Consequently, it suffers from the limitations of all stagnant narratives. It cannot adapt, cannot respond effectively to facts that challenge its basic assumptions. And this is the trap that Cooper falls into. By adopting the standard Palestinian assumptions and narrative, he unwittingly inherits all of its defects, which even his immersive style and sociological depth cannot fix. Ironically, despite enjoying the reputation of a history enthusiast who challenges established narratives, at least in other contexts, Cooper here becomes yet another reciter of an orthodoxy whose contradiction will get you in trouble in certain parts of the world. Those who have only ever heard Western historiography to the exclusion of the Palestinian one might therefore mistake him for a maverick, at least on this topic, oblivious to the fact that Cooper is recycling a story as old as it is flawed, albeit in his own unique style. The wares in the wineskin. The key assumptions behind Palestinian historiography are as follows. Jews and Muslims lived together in peace before Zionists migrated to Palestine. I mean, that's basically true as far as I understand it.
I mean, live together in peace doesn't mean conflict doesn't exist. But, I mean, coexisting, with large amounts of stability is pretty close to living together in peace.
And then two, the incoming Zionists were colonial invaders with no connection to their presumed homeland.
True.
I mean, true.
The genetics have not been kind to King Crocoduck's arguments on that either.
No. 3. Palestinian Arabs were nationally differentiated from the Arabs of the surrounding region. The Arabs of Palestine were in some fundamental sense distinct as a political unit from the Arabs of Syria, Lebanon, the Arabs of Transjordan, and the Arabs of Egypt. That is true.
I mean, I would agree. I would say there wasn't a huge differentiation. So this point is probably the one I agree with most. I don't think there was a huge differentiation. But continue.
I mean, I get what he was trying to say. Well, they're all Arabs, bro. They're all the same, and it's like, well, look at France. Who is actually French? For centuries, you didn't have, you had Gascons, you had Normans, you had Bretons, you had Burgundians. They all spoke their own different patois, their own regional dialects, and it took the 19th century French state, post-Franco-Prussian War, to really, through mass education, create a strong Arab identity. I mean, we've discussed in the Chatham House version series, Hungary, like when we did the one on Iraq, you had the Iraqi education ministry. It was literally the whole purpose of that education system was to drill into Iraqis of various ethnic groups that you're just one identity, regardless of whether you're Arab, Kurd, Syrian, or Jewish.
Absolutely, and this is the little sneaky thing he's hitting on. The Arabs of Palestine were in some fundamental sense distinct as a political unit. They were not distinct. The Arabs were not distinct as a political unit. They were under the occupation of the Ottoman Turks. They did not have political autonomy for at least the past, I would say, 800 years. Maybe since the Mamluks. Were the Arabs like a distinct political unit, not under the occupation of other people. But like let's save that for another time.
Certainly. 4. The Palestinians were unwitting victims of British and Zionist machinations, understandably defending themselves from colonial imposition by alien forces. Their actions and shortcomings fundamentally came down to the fact that they were honest to a fault, the victims of both tragic circumstances and colonial scheming. Had they only been more shrewd, had they only possessed the worldly resources necessary to direct their confusion and pain towards more productive means of resistance, they would not have ended up in their deplorable position today. I mostly agree with this. The one thing I would say is, as we have discussed previously, not all, I think, Palestinian actors were fair or honest. I mean, Haj Amin comes to mind. They could themselves, I think, be conniving and duplicitous, but for the most part, I agree with this point.
No, I mean, not only that. I mean, some Palestinians were traitors. Some Palestinians betrayed their own people and sold them out to the Zionists.
5.
That's just a fact.
Thank you. 5. This last one is for an English-speaking audience only. For an Arab-speaking audience, the Jews are evil and everything written about them in the protocols of the elders of Zion is true. But when addressing an English when addressing an English-speaking audience like Darryl Cooper, and through him, the audience of his podcast, the Jews are painted in a more humane light. This serves the function of not immediately disqualifying the Palestinian narrative in the eyes of the Western world. However, it carries over that most essential feature of the Palestinian version of events. It ultimately regards Jews as bearing the brunt of responsibility for Palestinian suffering. The summary of this final assumption that they generally opt for is that the Zionists punished Palestinians for the crimes of Europe. In this formulation, at least for English-speaking audiences, the Holocaust did happen, it was bad, and the pogroms and mass killings endured by the Jews were undeserved, but it also didn't justify the colonization of Palestine. I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. I mean, if you're going to, accept this idea that this group of people, it's not okay to commit genocide, it's then not okay for that same group of people to then commit their own genocide in another part of the world. I think that's entirely logically consistent.
Yeah, I love the sentence too. It ultimately regards the Jews as bearing the brunt of responsibility of Palestinian suffering. And no shit, Sherlock. Please, who is the other culprit in this situation? Like, who was causing the brunt of Palestinian suffering? The British? Arguably. I think that's disputable. Who was pointing the guns at the families when they were getting, when they were escorted out of Palestine? Who was holding the guns? That wasn't the British. It wasn't the Palestinians. It was the Zionists. That's all I have to say.
No, and furthermore, again, there's this whole lumping of, the British, the Balfour Declaration, they're all in cahoots with each other. And it's like, the current British government may be, sucking Zionist cock all it likes, but the thing is, this issue is complicated. There are many elites who, as my avatar, John Baggett Club, who certainly felt different about this issue and who I think would largely be agreeing with us, if he was still alive. But what I would also say is, it wasn't only the Palestinians. The British themselves were victims of Israeli actions. They killed British soldiers.
The King David Hotel. I mean,
Yes.
famously. Not to mention the other uprisings.
And again, so it's like he just wants to make this all simple. It's very Magian.
Yes, very very majoring, and so we're on opposite sides of this dialectic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Just to clarify, I don't know if he would go this far. I don't blame Jewish people for wanting to come to Palestine and, I don't know, buying a farm or buying a house. Like, okay, yes, I agree. Immigration restrictions are great. In principle, I don't have an issue with a Jewish family from Brooklyn buying a farm in Palestine. I'm not Palestinian, so I can't speak for them. But in principle, I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with a state that doesn't represent the majority of the people that live there and that stole private property from the peoples who had a right to, from the people who were there previously to them. Hey, how you doing?
Good. It's good to be back. Sorry about the delay. I'm here.
No, that's all right. Well, welcome. And just to address this comment quickly, Sunny Jim, UK abstained the UN vote to recognise Israel in 1948, when Israel was became an independent state. We're a fair way through. AE, we're just digesting this very not snarky, but very disingenuous article.
Sneaky.
Yes, that's it. Sneaky. That's what I was looking for.
I can imagine him
Many
rubbing
such
his hands in the
faces.
background.
Yes. So we're basically, so thus far, AE, we've come to the conclusion, according to King Crocoduck, who wrote this, that Palestinian society is totalitarian and not academic and not open-minded, and then that's a problem.
I know it is a major problem. They don't have like gay pride parades every single day, so that's a major issue.
No, clearly not diverse enough, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Taken together, these are fundamental assumptions of all Palestinian historiography that form the stagnant wineskin of the story that Darryl Cooper goes on to fill with a delightful new vintage that incorporates his particular strengths as storyteller and amateur sociologist. Let's tackle each of these assumptions to get a sense of where exactly Palestinian historiography goes wrong and how Cooper's presentation of that narrative exacerbates its weaknesses. Assumption 1, the peaceful Muslim locals. Perhaps the most foundational myth of Palestinian historiography is the notion that prior to the arrival of the Zionists, Jews and Muslims lived together in peace. This myth is essential to their version of the story because it establishes the innocence of the Arab Muslim population from the outset, putting to rest any foolish and naive notion that religiously motivated hatred might be implicated in the violence of the Arabs of Palestine. Indeed, Cooper himself castigates anyone who might suspect that Islamically motivated bigotry might have had anything at all to do with motivating the conflict in the early days of Zionism. He assures us that such views are naive and misinformed. By his account, the nature of Palestinian Arab resistance was fundamentally of an anti-colonial character, and religion served only to bolster and unify the disparate tribes of the region, at least to some extent. Islamic religion, in his view, played only an incidental role in the conflict rather than a fundamental one. I'm actually going to sort of agree with Crocoduck here, because I think when we did go through the Palestine chapter in the Chatham House Hunger, a lot of the Palestinian political organization did revolve around, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. So there was certainly a very strong theocratic element, I think, in the political organization. But of course, as we've discussed elsewhere, when you're dealing with these politics in the Middle East, you can't separate temporal or spiritual affairs so easily.
I mean, not only that, the Palestinian people didn't have a political leadership. They didn't have like political secular leaders. They were the majority of the population was Sunni Muslim, so they were represented by the Sultan, who was the Caliph of Islam. They didn't need, these these huge number of bureaucrats or local, representatives, because the head of the state was a Sunni Muslim. So they didn't have this complex political structure the way the Christians and the Jews did, because the Christians had to have local political leaders to interact with the Ottoman government because they weren't of the same religion. Like, the state religion was Sunni Muslim. And if you were a Sunni Muslim, you didn't need political representation. You were in charge of the state. Or at least your co-religionists were in charge of the state for you.
No, certainly. And I think that was part of the difficulties the Palestinians faced when the mandate was established, because they had to then create their own representative institutions to operate with the British authorities.
Oh, absolutely. And they weren't used to interacting in this political manner because the Sunnis had a state of their own. They didn't need local representative councils like the Christians and Muslims did. They didn't need a separate form of government under the Ottoman umbrella. The Ottoman government was their government.
No, thank you. Right. But that doesn't stop Cooper from talking about religious extremism and its role in igniting the conflict. It only stops him from talking about Islamic religious extremism specifically. He refers to the ominous Old Testament texts alluded to by certain Zionist actors during times of heated conflict with the Arabs, which recall genocides of Canaanite groups like the Amalekites in the same land that the Jews were once again trying to win. Cooper also belabors the apocalyptic theology of at least two different Christian Zionists, one who served in an administrative capacity and another who assisted the British in brutally suppressing the Arab revolts of the 30s. He emphasizes at length that people like this have no moral compunctions about inflicting atrocities against the local Arabs in the name of the Zionist cause, owing to their conviction that by fulfilling the prophecies of the New Testament, they were ignoring the end of the world. And yet in this land, which is so holy to the three great world religions, Cooper sees fit not only to uniquely neglect any causal role played by the one representing the side whose historiography he's repeating, but outright dismisses any such suggestion as baseless. He has time to tell us about religious extremism with scriptural basis in Jewish and Christian theology. There's no time whatsoever to talk about their Islamic counterparts. Well, I mean, in his defense, he may not being a Muslim, that familiar with, Islamic theology. I mean, is that not a fair point?
No, that's fair. I don't think King Crocoduck has a bad point here. I mean, if you're going to mention Jewish and Christian extremism, it's unavoidable to mention Islamic extremism. The point is, like, how prevalent was Islamic extremism in Palestine in the 1940s? I don't see much evidence for it. Maybe King Crocoduck has evidence I don't have. Maybe the Israeli historians he cited have the evidence that I haven't read. I don't know, but that's my opinion. Where is the evidence of the Islamic extremism in Palestine? Because we can cite the Christian Zionist and Jewish Zionist extremism that was there. I mean, he mentions the what's called the Amalekites or the Amalek. Like, what were the Israelis talking about a year ago as they were bombing Gaza? Kill the Amalek. Literally coming from the Old Testament as a rallying cry for Jewish extreme violence on Gaza.
No, and it reminds me because during the 1936 to 39 riots and protests in Palestine under the Mandate, I remember there was there was a division of the Jewish Defence Force and the Haganah that was led by a certain British general, Ord Wingate, who was a Plymouth Brethren. So he was one of these like evangelical Protestant types, and and
just on that point, I mean, like you said, in the 1936 Arab revolt, like, no one denies there was Muslim violence against the Jews. No one, like, there were hundreds of Jews or dozens of Jews that were murdered from 1936 to 1939 by Arab riots and revolts. Okay, however, like, there was no Al Qaeda in the 1940s. The way we see Islamic extremism today doesn't have a lot of basis in the 1940s. This is a more modern phenomenon of the Islamic extremist group, because, like, they didn't need an Islamic reason to get rid of these people. They were stealing their land. But I mean, that's just all I had to add, and not to mention the plurality of Christian Palestinians that also participated in the struggle.
And thank you. This is something you wanted to come in with, AE.
Yeah, I did want to make a point about this. Like, his point just seems like a whataboutism. Oh, because there's modern Islamic terrorism, we can apply that to the 1930s. Meanwhile, he's conveniently ignoring and not mentioning the fact that, like, the Jewish settlers in the Mandate committed plenty of acts of terrorism, well documented, against not just the Palestinians, but against the British government Mandate Authority. Famously, the King David Hotel bombing in Jerusalem. Groups such as the Irgun, future presidents of Israel literally commanded terrorist groups in the modern ocean in the Mandate with the explicit purpose of getting rid of the Arabs to make way for Jewish settlers. So it just seems like a whataboutism argument to me. That's what I wanted to say.
No, and bold comment from good friends of the channel, Nami Al-Kazan. Haganah, Ergun, and Lehi were the Al-Qaeda of their time. Yeah,
So true.
Hard to disagree.
The first terrorists were not Muslim. Hard to believe, but we know what religion they were, and we know what their ideology was. They were anarchists. Who was overrepresented in the anarchist movements.
I also believe one of these groups actually attacked I think it was a British cruise ship in the 1930s. One of these, like, Zionist Irgun type groups, actually. One of the first, like, terrorist attacks on a ship carrying British troops or something, I believe.
Lehi, the Stern Gang, literally attacked a civilian ship full of Jewish refugees from Europe called the Patriot, which caused it to sink. So they literally killed their own people in order to try and radicalize their population.
Many such cases.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Right. This omission is not unique to Cuba. He's just doing what Palestinian historiography has always done. But the absence of any mention of Islamic fundamentalism is felt even more acutely by his choice to describe at length the role of Jewish and especially Christian religious fundamentalism. This feature of his unique historical vintage thus reacts violently to the tattered old historiographic wineskin meant to contain it. Not once do the words Dhimmi or jizya appear in the entirety of his series. That silence is deafening. It continues the time-honoured Palestinian tradition of negating, denying, and erasing the long and painful history of institutionalized Muslim violence against the Jews over the course of 1400 years. So let's take another moment to rectify that. Yes, but hang on. Like the Dhimmi and the jizya, it just means that, you're a people of the book, Christian or Jew, and you have to pay the jizya, the tax. And who do they pay that to? You pay that to the Ottoman government of the Ottoman Empire. You don't pay that to the Palestinians. It's like, this is so just disingenuous.
You're a subject of the state. And yes, the state privileged citizens of the Sunni religion to the detriment of Christians and Jews. Okay? You are a subject of the state. You had to pay a tax. This is not...
The thing about the Ottoman Empire then spent that money on whatever, like, war or whatever. They weren't like, okay, Palestinians, here's the jizya we extracted from your Jewish neighbors. Come on, go rub it in their faces.
There were no forced conversions, and like I think this point needs to be said about the Ottomans, that it gets very lost. Like I don't want to make this into an Ottoman stream, but this is a very important point. There's a reason there were no like Syrian or Lebanese or Palestinian janissaries, right? The janissaries were young Christian men from Eastern Europe who were forcibly kidnapped into the Ottoman military, converted by the sword and forced to become like the royal guard of the Ottoman Empire. There's a reason. There's a reason none of the Middle Eastern Christians were janissaries. And it was because is because they lived in majority Muslim areas, that the Ottoman government did not need to patrol or force a lot of control over. In Eastern Europe, however, the Muslims were a minority, and they had to be extremely oppressive among the local Christians to maintain power by kidnapping Christian boys and so on and so forth. That is not a good thing. That is not a good thing the Ottomans did. As a Christian, I think that's terrifying and horrible, but that never happened to the minorities in the Middle East. They were a minority group among a majority Muslim population. So the government was actually very lax. The government was not very forceful or oppressive because there was no threat that the Jews and Christians would take over those areas of the Ottoman Empire.
No, thank you. That's a very interesting point. Right. Now it's going to go over dhimmitude. The origins of a dhimmitude. In Islamic societies, Christians and Jewish people of the book are permitted to remain in the territories conquered by the armies of the Prophet Muhammad and his followers under certain theologically motivated conditions. It pays to momentarily elucidate what exactly those motivations were. The foundational texts of Islam clearly state that the Jews are a cursed people. When the Prophet first encountered them in the 7th century CE, they had already been exiled from the land of Israel for hundreds of years. By Muhammad's reckoning, this was proof that they were being punished for something, and that something turned out to be the central thesis of the religion he developed. The Jews had corrupted monotheism. Their false theology had led them into disaster, and it was now up to Muhammad to correct the record of Islam. That version of monotheism, which according to him was the original version of Judaism before the Jews corrupted it. Early on in his career, the Prophet Muhammad apparently felt spurned by the Jewish theologians who dismissed him as yet another illiterate know-nothing when he showed up to enthusiastically discuss his theological musings with them. One suspects that his feelings of anger and rejection might have played some role in his decision to compare Jews to dirty animals in the new religion that he went on to found and spread by word and sword. It comes out in prophecies like the one assuring Muslims that on the day that they'll defeat the Jews, every stone will cry out, "There is a Jew hiding behind me, so kill him." It is open to speculation whether those feelings had any purchase in his decision to lead his armies in a raid of the Jewish settlement of Khaybar, whose inhabitants went on to be raped, murdered, and enslaved. It is likely that the violation of treaties, among other political considerations, accounted for the lion's share of what influenced this and many other acts of wanton violence against the Jews. Among his many victims was a Jewish woman named Safiya bint Huyay, who was forced to watch Muhammad's men destroy her home and behead her husband. She was abducted as a sex slave and made to convert to Islam in exchange for the privilege of becoming the Prophet's 10th wife. The Islamic tradition assures us that she fell in love with him on the horse ride away from the community he had finished just slaughtering. Regardless of his intentions, his words and actions are a matter of historical record, and they would set the tone for how Jews were to be regarded in the societies inspired by his revelations. And clarifying Muhammad's attitude towards Jews, which seemed to reflect a character torn between longing for Jewish approval and raging at Jewish rejection, these details help us contextualize the reason for the not-so-peaceful treatment of Jews at the hands of Muslims, who throughout history revered the Prophet as the highest exemplar of virtuous behavior. They help us understand how the Islamic attitude towards Jews has been shaped by the theological and sociological considerations. Well, the thing is, he's claiming here that Jews were murdered and raped and oppressed by the Muslims, but from what my understanding, if you look at Jewish and Islamic relations, with a few exceptions, they were largely pretty good. I mean, there's several examples. I mean, when the Muslims went to conquer Spain, who betrayed the Christian Visigothic kingdom and collaborated with the Muslims on the promise they'll be allowed to enslave Christians? It was the Jews of Iberia, and American Krogan did a whole series of videos on his BitChute if people want to go watch that. And not only that, later in the Ottoman Empire, later on in Spain, after the Reconquista, the Spanish Inquisition, the Spaniards kicked out all of their Jews. And where did those Jews go? They went to the Ottoman Empire to become the merchant class. They went to Constantinople. They went to Thessalonica. And
Morocco, Algeria.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot you're leaving out here, Queen Crocodile.
Two can play this game. And first of all, going back to something I said earlier, it's like these people can hold a grudge for 2,000 years. He's talking about the Prophet Muhammad and his conquests of Arabia. This is just conquest. What do you fucking expect? Like, any conquering army 1,000 years ago in the 7th century is going to behave this way. The Mongols behave this way. The Huns behave this way. The Romans also behave this way. I mean, I'm sure he's not a fan of the Romans either. But, you know, there are numerous examples of history of this is just what happens during conquest. But it's only the Muslims that he's referring to here, because these people are uniquely evil. And these people have uniquely treated the Jews worse than others, which is complete bullshit. Okay, how about after the conquest? What happened? Like, when the war is over, how were the Jews treated? Because he says they were under this treatment for 1,000 years. Please go on, King Crocoduck.
You think you want to say something, AA?
Yeah, at the same time, he's talking about how badly the Arabs treated the Jews and like all this other stuff. At the same time, he's like bragging about like how our guidance is what like the Prophet Muhammad sought, like above all things, like because we're just that great. So there's also this like bragging too.
Projection.
Well, also, yeah.
Or psychoanalyzing.
Yeah, that I get out of like the first paragraph you read. So I just wanted to bring that up because at the same time, it's like complaining, but it's also like, oh, we're so great. He had to seek us out for religious knowledge. Well, is it both ways? It's so hard with these people, you know.
He hates us because he's jealous.
Yes, essentially.
It's always the same argument for the past 1,000 years. They hate us because they're jealous.
Well, I suppose that's one positive thing is to say about Palestinians. They're going to live rent-free in Jews' heads for just centuries.
So true.
Right, okay. So the Jews are an ancient people with over 1,000 years of history preceding the creation of Islam. From a theological point of view, this fact alone makes Judaism an inherent threat to the legitimacy of Islam. And Jews are still around even after the Prophet Muhammad shared his revelations with the world. And it can only mean one of two things. Either the Jews are every bit as wicked as Muhammad claimed, or the Prophet was a hateful, raving, murderous lunatic. In a society where the behavior of a hateful, raving, murderous lunatic...
Hold on. Sorry. Can we stop at that sentence? Just scroll up a little bit. The Jews are still around, even after the Prophet Muhammad shared his revelations with the world. Then it can only mean one of two things. Either the Jews are every bit as wicked as Muhammad claimed, or the Prophet was a hateful, raving, murderous lunatic. Or how about he just didn't kill all the Jews? Or maybe he was, I don't know, merciful after total victory against the Jews? Can we... sorry, I just needed to, like... How can you say this can only mean one of two things? That makes no sense whatsoever.
And to come in as well, if you think about it, Muhammad died in 632 CE, and he'd only conquered the Arabian Peninsula. They hadn't even conquered like the rest of the Middle East by that point. So had they actually seriously conquered or killed or murdered, raped any Jews by that point anyway? Because if they hadn't, then he's completely just falsely claiming Muhammad responsible for something that he never did. So.
Why would they? They were conquered. After you conquer a people, you don't need to kill them all. Although I'm not sure the Zionists would see it that way.
I don't know. Maybe he's thinking that because of the mid-century Germans, everybody who hates Jews, behaves the same way as the mid-century Germans.
No, I just need to stop at that. I just needed to stop at that sentence because that this is such a false. This is not even a false binary. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, ultimately, this stream's called the Zionist Worldview. The Zionist Worldview is that Muslims are dirty, barbaric, evil people that are a threat to Jews and everything. And here's the thing: if we can demonize them, then we can do whatever we want to them because they're savages, right?
I mean, simultaneously, Muslims want to kill all Jews everywhere across the world with no exceptions. However, Jews were living in Muslim countries for over 1,400 years. Why?
Yeah, it's just constant doublespeak from him, and like every single paragraph, it seems like in projection, always projecting, basically.
Yes, I think Vingel just hit the nail on the head. It's just projections. Germans don't think like that. They do.
Indeed. Yeah. Right. I think there's going to be a new law. Hunger's law. It's always projection with these Zionists.
So far, it's never failed.
Right. And in a society where the behaviour of a hateful, raving, murderous lunatic is sanctified as the highest standard of morality, second-class citizenship functions as a mechanism of legitimation. If the Jews and Christians are kept in the subordinated and humiliating role by the Muslim overlords, then this must surely weigh in favour of the claim that Muhammad was right all along. The wicked unbelievers are receiving their just fruits, and those who cave under the pressure to assimilate and convert, thereby earning first-class citizenship among the sons of Ishmael, must surely have been swayed by the obvious truth and morality of Islam. The status of people of the book as second-class citizens to be abused, extorted, and whenever they forget their proper place beneath the heels of Muslims, pogrom serves a societal function. The wretched condition of the Jews assures the Muslim polity of the truth of their own doctrine. It assures them that the scales of cosmic justice are balanced by the divinely inspired words of the Quran. Again, what about all of those Jewish merchants in the Ottoman Empire? I mean, I'm pretty sure they had a pretty comfortable standard of living. Like, they can't have been that oppressive.
Baghdad was a quarter Jewish. The city of Baghdad was a Jewish city. I mean, it had, like, a quarter of the city was Jewish. And that's just one point. I mean, there were Jews all over the place. There were Jews in Palestine before the Zionists showed up, which apparently he doesn't deny. He doesn't deny that there were Jews in Palestine before Zionism. Morocco, Algeria, another example. And, like, he says pogromed. Name one pogrom pre-World War I of Muslims pogroming the Jews. Name one.
Here's what he's doing, because obviously with that word, we usually think of it in terms of the 19th century Russian pogroms against Jews in the Russian Empire. And he's almost doing like a bait and switch, isn't he? He's using that word, knowing we'll think of that, and then not giving the examples.
All his enemies are white European Christians. The Jews, the Muslims are just brown white European Christians. It's the same enemy in their mind. It just doesn't follow.
It's also ignoring the fact that when you look at a lot of the North African countries, a lot of the top advisors to these Islamic monarchies were Jews. Jews had a predominant influence there, like Sephardics, Maserati Jews, like famously were doctors of the kings, caliphs of like the various kingdoms of the Islamic world. I mean, and he's just ignoring that fact, not mentioning that. Like, they've always just been massacred wherever they went.
I think this is a tell. He uses the word pogrom. This is a tell. He still sees white European Christians as the mortal enemy, and Muslims are acting like white European Christians by pogroming the Jews. Maybe that's psychoanalyzing, but that's what I see.
No, I don't disagree with you. And so just bring up a comment from Namil Carlson again. What I'm saying is that as long as Jews are a minority, Muslims have no special hatred or need to purge them. They're much more preoccupied with the Sunni-Shia divide. And thank you for bringing that up, Namil Carlson. Yes, because the Sunni and Shia Muslims, even to this day, absolutely hate each other's guts for most respects. And you can see that. I mean, if you look at, you've got Iran, Iraq, and Syria and Lebanon up against, the rest of the Middle East pretty much. And why is that? Because the significant predominance of Shia Muslims in those countries. And if anything, you can almost say that that's also interesting, isn't it, Unger, that all these Shia Muslim countries are the ones who seem to have the most beef with Israel, where all the Sunni ones seem to be on relatively better terms.
Well, I mean, there's geopolitical reasons for that. Obviously, the U.S. is a big influence there. That wasn't the case. I mean, that was not the case in the 60s or 70s. Before the peace deals. But what did America do to ensure peace with Israel? Bribe Egypt and Jordan with billions of dollars, and then that started the whole Sunni trend. and the Shiites stayed firm. I mean, well, it gets complicated because Iran was a Shiite nation that was allied to Israel in the 50s and 60s. But again, it gets complicated.
No, fair point. They're probably getting a bit off topic, so let's carry on. So it should come as no surprise then that the treatment of Jews under the various Islamic empires is only ever referenced in a positive fashion when contrasted with European Christians, who until modern times had mistreated their Jews for parallel reasons, albeit to a harsher degree. Whenever I hear someone claim that the Jews had it better under Islam than Christianity, I cannot help but be reminded of the old American slavers' insistence that their treatment of blacks was less severe than that of Arabs, who had been known to castrate and murder their slaves en masse. The purpose of such whataboutism is never to insist upon historical accuracy, but rather to abrogate responsibility. And in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this remark, Muslims treated Jews better than the Christians did, is little more than a cynical attempt at an alibi. But it's not an alibi, it's completely true.
I just don't disagree with that. He's trying to, God damn it. I don't even know how to phrase this.
Also, notice how he's bringing up slavery, which is like an American coded like liberal worldview thing that like is the gravest sin that like white Christians is coded against have ever committed. Notice how he's bringing that in there as well.
I just think it's like the Dhimmitude is not slavery. It just means you have to pay a tax to practice your religion. It's a religious tax. It's not slavery or servitude.
You had Jewish law. The Jews weren't oppressed by Islamic law. They had to follow Jewish law. You just paid a tax because you were not a member of the state religion. I mean, it was not like, okay. When people think of second-class citizenship, they think of slavery. First of all, completely historically inaccurate. Slaves are not citizens. And that's just not how reality worked. And none of the history describes it in this way. I mean, he can't name a single Muslim pogrom against the Jews. Why did Jews migrate to Muslim countries after the fall of Spain or Andalusia? None of this makes sense. He's saying basically because the Muslims didn't allow the Jews to have a state, which the Jews didn't want at that time anyway. Therefore they're enslaving us against our will.
But there's the thing. It almost feels like he's taking the modern 20th century, 21st century history and then transplanting it back onto the past. Is really what it feels like he's trying to do.
Exactly.
Right. We could dismiss it by considering some features of the second-class citizenship that Muslim societies inflicted upon their Jews. I've already mentioned the two terms of central importance, Dhimmi and jizya. Let's take a moment to examine what these things are and how they shape the cultural landscape of the pre-1948 conflict in Palestine. The wages of Dhimmitude. Dhimmi is a name given to the people of the book, whose status as second-class members of the Islamic empires were enshrined in law. The degree of humiliation varied across time and place. It was better, by and large, to be a Jew in the Abbasid Empire than the Mamluk Empire, or a Jew in the final years of Ottoman Jerusalem than in the first years of Ottoman Jerusalem. Regardless, the message sent to the Jews was always clear: you're an inferior people and you need to know your place. Whether by limiting access to institutions, mandating deference to Muslims, suppressing expressions on non-Islamic religious practice, forbidding residence in houses higher than those of Muslims, or making it illegal to ride a horse, societies that institutionalized the practice of distinguishing Dhimmi from Muslims ensured the perpetual humiliation of the Jews. They made Jews identify themselves by wearing yellow badges on their clothing centuries before Hitler got the idea. I strongly contest that.
I've never heard of that.
I want a source for that. I want a source for that.
Right, I'm going to open this link he's put.
He was directly ripping out of a Steven Spielberg movie.
Okay, it's taken me to a Wikipedia article called
The
Yellow
greatest
Badge.
source of information.
Yeah, I'm skeptical already. According to this Wikipedia article, it says that the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil issued a decree in 850 AD that ordered Jews and Christians to wear the zunar, honey-coloured outer garments, and badge-like patches on their servants' clothing. Okay. again,
Never seen that before. Never wasn't aware of it. I would contest that.
Okay, so the source for that is apparently the Routledge Revival's Medieval Jewish Civilization.
Okay.
By the name. Who is the author?
Hang on, sorry. They didn't have a typical name. Hang on. The name.
Can we get an early life check?
Taylor and Francis is the author of that book.
Can we get?
Oh no, sorry, no, sorry, no. Sorry, Taylor and Francis is the publisher. The author, Norman Roth. Every single time.
I mean, he might as well literally just say there was piles of shoes. Like, he might as well just say the same thing, basically. He might as well.
Oh yes, and if you go to ancient Baghdad, you'll find some suspicious gas-like chambers, in the depths of the city.
Under the hanging gardens, of course.
Oh dear. Signor Pananti, a 19th century traveller across the Ottoman Empire, aptly summarised the condition of dhimmitude. There is no species of outrage or vexation to which the Jews are not exposed. The indolent Moor with a pipe in his mouth and his legs crossed calls any Jew who is passing and makes him perform the offices of a servant. Even if fountains were happier, at least they were allowed to murmur.
Bullshit.
Of the many
Bullshit.
And here's the thing. I strongly suspect, because you've talked about this before, Hunger, that in the Middle East you've got this, this idea of the patron-client relationship. Is it not possible that dhimmitude was just like a society-wide patron-client relationship? You, the Jews, are the clients of the Muslim community, the Ummah, and for that, right to practice your religion, you've got to pay the tax.
I don't know if I would go that far. I don't. The Sultan was not the patron of the ethnic minority groups. I mean, in some ways, yes, in other ways, no. I can't answer definitively on that one. Like, I am just sure it's like, this image of the travel guide. A Moor with a pipe in his mouth, legs crossed. Hey, Jew, come wash my feet. That did not fucking happen.
Yeah, come do physical labor, the most radical thing ever for a Jew, apparently. That's the worst thing that could happen.
I don't believe that.
I mean, the reason I say that, Hunger, is this passage reminds me of there's a Martial, the Roman author's epigrams, because he, for a time, had spent time as a client of a wealthier Roman, and he talks about, why is it, Titus, you have me up at 6 a.m, having to follow you about and escort you everywhere, and it's like, and that's what I mean. When you're a client, sometimes you do have to go through a bit of, oh, not this again, or a little bit of humiliation or embarrassment, but it's your position.
I think the humiliation is completely exaggerated. They were tolerated. They were tolerated. They were allowed to practice their religion. They paid the tax. They followed their own laws. They didn't follow Sunni law. They followed Jewish law. I mean, what more could you want in the 16th century?
Well, of the many symbols of submission that were inflicted upon dhimmis, the one which stands out the most is the jizya, as with the word dhimmi, which euphemistically translates to protected person. Jizya translates to poll tax. This tax was not issued in exchange for any kind of political representation. Dhimmitude precluded any such possibility. The poll tax was issued in exchange for the protection of protected people, in more or less the same way a fee is paid up by a business owner in exchange for a mob boss's protection. And in the subsistence level living conditions that characterize Jewish life under Islamic rule, the extortionate jizya could mean the difference between eating and starving. Perhaps no other instrument, not even the slings and arrows of Islamic conquest, proved so effective at persuading Jews to convert to the faith that preaches no compulsion in religion than the jizya. And again, it's like, well, it can't have been that extortionate if Jews were able to live lives as wealthy merchants. And the thing is, as well, just let me finish, but he's talking about political representation. Again, he's bringing in these modern liberal notions. There was no political representation. The Ottoman Empire was an absolute monarchy. It's like, it's a caliphate. You do not have democracy in the sodding caliphate.
I just want to say a thing. Okay, King Crocoduck. I accept your point. The state is a mob, all right, and taxes are protection. Let's say you not pay your taxes to the IRS. I mean, the mob is stealing your money. you can stop paying taxes to the IRS whenever you want. Let's see what happens. Let's see if you're in a position between eating or starving. Go ahead. I'm sure the American government is anti-Jewish because they're forcing you to pay taxes.
Maybe you want to come in with AE or...
And what's next? Are they going to make you sweep the floor? I mean, the levels of depravity here are unbelievable.
Imagine telling a Jew to part with his money. You know, the jokes write themselves.
Meanwhile, they're almost elite tier merchants in the entire Arab world, but like they're gonna starve to death because of the jizya. But they're allowed to have their synagogues all across Palestine. So very strange, huh? Very strange how that works.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that the idea of a Jew having to pay money is like enough to make them think of starvation. It's just like, calm down. It's like, it's just money.
It's not just money. It's a spiritual experience.
That's certainly saying it. Even the famed theologian and physicist Maimonides, often touted as a shining example of a Jew who had thrived under tolerant Islamic rule, had some choice words for those who had imposed dimitude and the jizya upon him. The writing in the Epistle to Yemen in 1172, Maimonides remarks, God has entangled us with this people, the nation of Ishmael, who treat us so prejudiciously and who legislate our harm and hatred. No nation has ever arisen more harmful than they, nor has anyone done more to humiliate us, degrade us, and consolidate hatred against us. He continues, we bear the inhuman burden of their humiliation, lies, and absurdities, being, as the prophet said, like a deaf man who does not hear or a dumb man who does not open his mouth. Our sages disciplined us to bear Ishmael's lies and absurdities, listening in silence, and we have trained ourselves, old and young, to endure their humiliation. As Isaiah said, I've given my back to the smith miters and my cheek to the beard pillars. 4 centuries later, another Jewish scholar and physician, Solomon ibn Verga, authored the Shevet Yehuda, in which he recounted an incident where the Jews had foolishly forgotten that their proper place was beneath the boot heel of the prophet's loyal followers. According to him, a sultan had been blessed with a highly trusted and influential Jewish advisor, and the regional Muslim population held him in high esteem. But when he died, instead of appointing a Muslim to the role, the sultan appointed the Jew's son. This led to widespread anger and ultimately a pogrom against the local Jewish population. Such stories were by no means uncommon in the Arab Muslim world. Whenever the Jews had the temerity to forget their proper place, the local Muslim population was reliably on hand to remind them. Jews were the only...
Sorry. I think that's a very meritocratic system. Why should the advisory role be hereditary?
No, certainly. I mean, if you think about it, you mentioned the Janissaries earlier. The Janissaries were technically a meritocratic institution because if you were a member, you got access to very exclusive, military and bureaucratic positions.
You had privileges.
I love this dualism too, where it's like we're so oppressed, like literally they're massacring us every 5 seconds, but at the same time, the Sultan is appointing us to be his top advisor.
We're so oppressed.
We're so oppressed.
The Sultan won't give my son a job. He's gonna have to make it on his own.
I mean, it's like that meme of like the political parties and who they fund in America. It's like every single major corporation funds one party, but because like. And then, like, there's, like, one that funds the Republicans, and it's like, help, we're so oppressed. So, I just couldn't help but think of that.
It's like, it's another shower.
Every single time.
Jews were not only the Dhimmi to be issued periodic reminders of this sort. Beginning in 1839, the Ottoman Empire attempted to modernize with a series of reforms called the Tanzimat, which aimed at granting more rights to Dhimmi. By 1850, these reforms had notably eased commercial restrictions upon Christian merchants in Aleppo. This sparked discontent amongst the local Muslims, who perceived their neighbours burgeoning equality under law as a threat to the divinely sanctioned economic advantages conferred to them by the Quran's policy of extorting non-Muslims. The resulting riots left dozens of Christians dead in their homes and churches. 13 years later, in a non-Muslim society on the opposite side of the Atlantic, another reform would be issued. That proclamation similarly elevated the legal status of a different subjugated minority. Is he seriously going there? Oh my god.
You know, the Jews and African Americans, they have a lot in common, so I hear.
You notice how he projects a lot of American, like, liberal, like, regime, boomer truth into this as well to fit his narrative. Very interesting how he keeps doing that.
I mean,
No.
as far as I'm aware, Jews did not have to, like, haul away in
Jews
them
were never
cotton fields.
enslaved. Jews were never enslaved. It was a tax.
I wonder, like Hunger, if next time you meet if you ever bump into like an African American, just say to them, hey, do you, according to Jews, they were just as oppressed as you, they think paying tax is the same as working in like a cotton field. How do you feel about that?
I would love to hear their opinion on this. No, it's just I just want to like, I have this image. This is your brain. This is your brain on liberal Zionism. Both a shit lib and a Zionist. The two worst ideologies I could put together.
Well, it's like it's like a schizophrenic personality. You're like shit lib when it's nothing to do with Jews, but as soon as it's Jews or Israel, you're suddenly like an ethno-nationalist. That's
what it is. That is King Crocoduck in a nutshell. When it's about the Goyim, I'm a shit lib. When it's about the Jews, I'm an ethno-nationalist. And never the two shall meet.
No, and as it was in the Levant, so it was in Dixie. Even relatively modest attempts at legislating equality under the law soon yielded bounties of strange fruit. With blood, we've lost Hunger.
Hopefully.
Oh, hello.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. He's carrying on with this slavery comparison. Even relatively modest attempts at legislating equality under the law too yielded bounties of strange fruits, with blood on the leaves and blood on the roots. There seems to be something cross-cultural about the phenomenon where the political elevation of a formerly abused and humiliated people towards a state of political equality is soon followed by the frenzied bloodlust of their former tormentors. Whether that murderous rage is found among the broken stained glass in Aleppo, the burning crosses in Dixie, or the raped and murdered throngs of Jews in 1920 Nebi Musa, 1921 Jaffa, and 1929 Hebron, it seems to materialize wherever and whenever a formerly subjugated people refuses to accept their proper place. And it's interesting, isn't it, that he's going with this? Because if I recall correctly, you've had that Jewish fellow called Leo Frank, who was accused of raping a Gentile woman. And if I recall correctly, did he not try to accuse an African American of that same crime?
He did. And his murder
he did.
Founded the AL. It was the basis of the founding of the ADL. But please, AE, go off. Defend the honor of Dixie.
No, to put this into perspective, like the most racist Jim Crow, like stereotype court, literally found that like the evidence was so overwhelmingly for Leo Frank committing this rape and murder. They were like, oh, there's no way this black person could have done it. And he was sentenced to death. But then they were like, well, we're going to pardon you. So the Southerners hung him for being a pedophile and a murderer. And that's how the ADO was created.
And
that would never happen again.
They've never forgotten it ever since.
No, they've never forgotten it. And that's why they have a special hatred for Dixie, apparently, too. I love how he also keeps bringing in the like slavery comparison because his ancestors had to pay a tax and like sweep something one time. In like all of 2,000 years.
And the thing is, we're talking about slavery, as I mentioned earlier, with why the Jews betrayed the Christians in Iberia. It's because they wanted to enslave Christians, because the Visigothic kings would not let them enslave Christians.
It's also very interesting, because like when you look at like who funded the Atlantic slave trade, it points to King Crocoduck's people actually had a big role in that industry.
It's always projection with the
Yeah,
Zionists.
it's every single time it's projection here with this guy in the tribe.
Yep. In the case of the American South, the peculiar institution that was overthrown had principally rested upon a couple of centuries of tradition, but in the case of the 20th century Palestine, the institution in question had persisted for 1,300 years, its authority divinely ordained, as the Arabs of Palestine enthusiastically chanted during protests in 1920. This is our land, the Jews are our dogs. Take note of the phrasing. They did not say the Jews are dogs, they said the Jews are our dogs. There is much more to say about the role Islam who played in fostering the virulent hatred that Palestinian Muslims held for the Jews, who refused to accept their proper place. But the fact that Palestinian historiography refuses to acknowledge the matter, much less honestly engage with it, is damning. In choosing to adopt that historiography, Cooper has not only inherited this crippling defect of the Palestinian wineskin, but has amplified its weakness by imbuing his narrative vintage with outsized attention to the worst elements of Jewish and Christian theology, whilst remaining silent about Islam. These selective omissions and distortions, which Cooper has inherited from the historiography he recites, are consistent with the ongoing campaign of denial, erasure, and historical negation that characterizes the Palestinian side's plea of innocence. The myth of peaceful coexistence between Muslims and Jews prior to the commencement of the Zionist enterprise plays a central role in Palestinian historiography. It will be revisited repeatedly as we make our way through the other assumptions. For now, let's proceed to the second foundational assumption of that historiography. Assumption 2. The rootless cosmopolitan invaders. Palestinian historiography has always been burdened by bitter and perverse ironies. A few things make this more clear than its characterization of Zionist migrants to the land. Perhaps the chief irony of the Palestinian denial of continuous Jewish connection to the land throughout history, both in spiritual and material terms, is that the Jews' claim to the land would have been weaker if not for the existence of the aforementioned jizya. Had the Arabs of Palestine not enacted extortionate taxes upon the Jews following their conquest over Jerusalem in 638 CE, thereby forcing native Jews to either convert or flee to another territory to avoid the jizya, the diasporic Jews scattered throughout the world would not have been as incented to send money to support their Dhimmified brethren, thereby maintaining that both an ongoing political and economic connection to the land over the course of 1,300 years. And another point I should make out is it really bothers me that he does the gay atheist CE, not the proper BC AD. I know. Yeah. If not for the dimitude forced upon the Jews of Palestine, this ongoing material connection to the land by Jews is the European, Arabic, and African diasporas might never have been needed to help sustain a continuous Jewish presence in the region. In this counterfactual, Zionists would only have been able to point out to the ideological component of Jewish connection to the land, which is characterized by the national character of the Jewish identity. Let's take a moment to examine that character.
Hold on. What is he trying to say here? If the Jews weren't second-class citizens in Palestine, they wouldn't have sent money to Palestine? What is he trying to say here in these two paragraphs?
And he mentions African diaspora. I mean, like, what African diaspora? In
the Ethiopians? the Ethiopian Jews that Israel is trying to get rid of?
Okay, that's not something I was aware of, actually.
Deport.
Mm-hmm.
Did they also forcibly sterilize them as well?
Yes, that was. I mean, can you? Hey man, please scroll up a little bit. I need to understand this opening passage.
Okay, so Palestinian historiography has always been burdened by bitter and perverse ironies, and few things make this more clear than its characterization of Zionist migrants to the land. Perhaps the chief irony of the Palestinian denial of continuous Jewish connection to the land throughout history, both in spiritual and material terms, is that the Jewish claims to the land would have been weaker if not for the existence of the aforementioned jizya. Had the Arabs of Palestine not enacted extortionate taxes upon the Jews following their conquest over Jerusalem in 638 CE, thereby forcing native Jews to either convert or flee to another territory to avoid the jizya, the diasporic Jews scattered throughout the world would not have been as incented to send money to support their Dhimmified brethren, thereby maintaining both an ongoing political and economic connection to the land over the course of 1,300 years. Okay. I think I see what he's trying to do. He's essentially trying to argue that the Arab conquest and paying the jizya is what caused the Jewish diaspora, which is a very bad stretching of history, because from my understanding at least, you could argue it's all of the different events. It's the Roman conquest of you had the original Babylonian captivity under Nebuchadnezzar. Then you've got the Persians coming in, the Egyptians, the Romans, the fucking Greeks. Like, there's so many different people have conquered that realm and dealt with Jewish revolts and cracked down on them. It's just like, if you're going to argue this, you could at least say it was over generations of these various revolts. But here, because he's got this narrative that the Palestinians are like wrong and evil, he has to go with this narrative that specifically the Arab Muslims that are responsible for the Jewish diaspora.
No, not even that. There were barely any Jews left in Jerusalem after the Byzantine Empire. How many Jews were there to be extorted by the Muslims? Like, the Jews in the Byzantine Empire weren't treated well either. I mean, there's a reason why the Jews hate the fucking Romans, and always have for their entire history. Like, who was left in Jerusalem that was kicked out because the Muslims conquered in 600 AD? Because the Byzantines had been controlling that territory for 600 years. And what happened in those 600 years? They destroyed the temple. they deported the Jews to Iraq as well at that time. Like, there's so much wrong with this situation.
And again, another thing is I mean, because he's talking about Dhimmi and jizya. Well, as he's mentioned, but not really gone into, Christians had to pay it as well. So what were they? What was happening? Were you trying to say that only the Jews were enslaved, but the Christians, they were absolutely fine. They were treated much better. No difference whatsoever.
Oh no, he doesn't care, and then another reason he doesn't care is, not going back to more recent history. Why did the Christians of Palestine side with the Muslims against the Zionists? It's because the Muslims and the Christians were indigenous to the land, and the Zionists were European immigrants trying to take over the territory. Their territory.
And I think you mean refugees hunger. They were fleeing war and genocide.
Of course, with guns from the French and British, fleeing with their weapons.
Fleeing with their Soviet-made weapons, I might add.
Yeah, can't forget the Soviets. They're Mirage aircraft.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, the story of the Jews abridged. Well, judging by the length of this article, I don't think it's going to be as bridge as he's making it out to be. But let's see. The word Islam is Arabic for submission, referring to the defining spiritual ethos of that faith, submission to the will of God. The word Christianity is derived from the Greek Christos, the literal meaning of which, anointed one, refers to the central subject of worship within that faith. In contrast, the word Judaism is not derived from abstract spiritual concepts, but from the kingdom of Judah, which has a particular place and time in history. To be a Jew is to be of Judah. True enough, that kingdom was named after one of the 12 original tribes of Israel, whose name could in turn be interpreted as something spiritual like thank God, but this was just a matter of historical happenstance. Had one of the other tribes, say Naphtali, whose name means twisting, been the one to develop a kingdom at that time, then Jews would instead have been called Naphtalists. In retrospect, it is fortunate that this did not happen. The name-twisted people would have given anti-Semites throughout history that much more material to rationalize their hate, but I digress. The point is, Jewish national identity traces its origins to a specific place and time in history, beginning approximately 930 BCE in the Judean mountains of the southern Levant. The naming convention of Judaism alone, the fact that it has a territorial rather than spiritual basis, should give pause to those who deny the authenticity of Jewish national identity. To Cooper's credit, he doesn't explicitly support the common Palestinian talking point that Jews are a religion and not an ethnicity. But the point is still worth making because it helps to develop context that undercuts much of the historiography that he repeats. And again, this is something that frustrates me. In this article, Krokotuk has flip-flopped between the religious definition and an ethnic definition, and he's even conflating the two. And he's deliberately doing this to confuse us because he's kept saying Jews, and Jews, from my understanding of that term, is a religious identity, not a racial one. Whereas now, by using this idea of the Kingdom of Israel or Kingdom of Judah, he's now trying to claim an ethnic basis. And it's like, which is it?
not only that. I mean that was the entire Dave Distributus talk. Like the King Crocoduck Dave Distributus talk was just that for 2.5 hours. It's like, is it a religion? Is it ethnicity? Like, is it both? And if it's both, then how does this apply? Why is there a special exemption for this group and not for other groups? That was the entire debate he had with Dave. And first of all, let's talk about the kingdom of Judea and Israel. All right, I'm a Phoenician or Canaanite, either or, close enough. I don't see much difference. Debatable. Do I have a right to kick out the kingdom of Judah and its descendants from the land? I think I do. This is a 4,000-year-old claim. I predate the kingdom of Judea as a Canaanite. Therefore, you're on stolen land.
And one other thing, Hunger, what I love about this map, so this map is from 930 BC, so 930 BC. Okay, I remember this map got shared by another Zionist and Middle East observer based Med. He quote tweeted it with a older map of like Bronze Age Egypt, because the Egyptian New Kingdom under Ramses II literally controlled the entire Levant, and it's just like by that logic, modern Egypt has a better claim to Palestine and Israel than Israel does.
Unironically.
It's like we was kings, bruh.
Even the Eastern Romans would have a better claim then, because they ruled the land for longer than Israel existed from that point on. They ruled
the Mesopotamians were there first.
I mean, literally, how far back do you want to go? I mean, we go back to like the original beginning of human civilization.
That's what it is. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's all special pleading. It's like we could like this is the Native American argument. Like, it's special pleading. You don't have a special claim because you were there 3,000 years ago. There were people there 4,000 years ago, too, that weren't you.
And the thing is, it's like, let's take this to its, like, logical extreme, and let's go with, the whole, this subversive idea that, all humans came from Africa. Well, by that logic, then, Chippewa from, like, Zimbabwe has the same right to like Israel. Then, come on, we're all out of Africa. We're all one human race, right?
We all do then, by that logic. I have a claim then.
Don't give them any ideas. don't give them any ideas.
Just the two kingdoms of the ancient Hebrew-speaking peoples prior to 700 BC. The Jewish national identity comes from the southern of the pair. By his account, the Jews of Europe had no connection to their ancient homeland. The metaphor he uses in the podcast series invites you to imagine that you're living in a house only to find an intruder barge in. The intruder claims a portion of the house for himself on the grounds he used to own it, and that he really needs a place to stay right now. Even if you initially consent, he proceeds to invite all his new friends, who then proceed to antagonize and provoke you. After being a bad and invasive new tenant, he ultimately throws you out and claims the whole property for himself, leaving you homeless. Let's modify this metaphor to make it more closely resemble reality. The intruder in question has, over the course of his entire absence, contributed to the mortgage. Jews living in diaspora economically supported the Jews living in the land of Israel by sending money to their subjugated brethren for the purpose of maintaining a continuous Jewish presence in the homeland. Why? Because the intruder never lost his sentimental connection to that property after being thrown out. Every day, 3 times a day, diasporic Jews around the world would turn in the direction of Jerusalem and recite a series of prayers called the Amidah, one of which begged God to let them someday return to their homeland. This activity occurred continuously over the course of 2 millennia in exile, alongside pilgrimages to the Holy Land and diasporic charities in the form of Halukah, which contributed to the region's economy. And so just go back to this idea that, the Jews are like bad tenants. Well, even if you're a bad tenant, even if you decorate the property, it's not your right to, because it's not your fucking house.
Also, I just want to make a really quick point about his metaphor. His metaphor is a giant projection. When he said the Arabs are the ones being invited in, the Jews already own the place. It's I don't think there were that many Jews in pre-mandate Palestine. Actually, it was the settlers who were coming into, in many cases, Christian and Arab lands. And were the bad tenants, actually, who were also inviting in their friends and family to come in as well. So I think that's a massive amount of projection in his metaphor there.
I mean, not only that, okay, there's a lot of history in the territory of Israel and Palestine. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of ruins. There's a lot of architecture. Like, still, the entire land was not, inhabited by the Jews. There's not every single square inch of land was owned by the Jews. There were other people there. First of all, they were conquered by the Romans, and if you lost the war, you lose the right, because it's the right of conquest. And they get, I don't know how else to say this. Help me out here a little bit.
No, you don't understand though. Like, they're the special people though, so like it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but you see, we're not special people at AE, and we've actually got to provide proper academic rigor and critique to this awful, terrible propaganda. Yeah, too much Zionism rots the brain.
I mean, I love the fact it's like if I send money to my family in Brazil, and my family in Brazil has been there for, I don't know, 3 generations or something. Therefore, what? I can come to Brazil and become Brazilian. Do I have as much right to be in Brazil as the native Brazilians?
No, of course not. Unless you're Jewish.
Yeah.
Right. The Jewish holidays all make reference to events that have happened to the Jewish nation, from mythologized accounts of how the national identity formed through the Exodus, Passover, to the events symbolizing the successful revolt of the Maccabees, the original Zionists. What an amazing statement. Against the occupying Seleucid Empire, thereby restoring national independence, Hanukkah. Well, no, that's a total lie. The Maccabean revolt, all it did was, because what was that about? It was because the Antiochus IV Epiphanes wanted the Jews to practice the Greek Hellenic faith and worship their gods alongside their Jewish gods. The Jews did not want to do that, hence they revolted. Revolt was successful because they successfully got the Seleucid state to stop trying to force their religion on them. That's not independence. You were still a subject.
No, they just wanted to keep their traditions. But I mean, I don't have a huge problem with this argument, because it's about, I mean, the if you want to be very charitable, the idea is about Jewish sovereignty. And I mean, even if you take it as like, an allegory for Jewish sovereignty, it's like you were still subjects. I mean, yeah, that's all I had to add.
No, thank you. Okay. Right. They encompass both apocryphal stories, like the time a sexy Jewish lady saved the entire nation by winning the heart of a Persian king, Purim. And it always goes back to the Jewesses, doesn't it, though? The historically verifiable events like the assassination of the last governor of Judah, commemorated as a national day of mourning with the fast of Gedalia. The Passover Seder concludes with the phrase "next year in Jerusalem," symbolizing both the historical connection to the land and the enduring hope of return. Even Rosh Hashanah, the new year of the Jewish lunar calendar, was initially calibrated with respect to Jerusalem. Prior to the adoption of a mathematical convention, time was marked by the appearance of the new moon. Since this can vary from location to location, a new moon seen in Beijing might not be visible over Jerusalem. Even time is kept by the Jews with reference to the harvest cycle of their homeland. Given that the Jewish national identity formed in pre-modern times, a mystical and religious superstructure was overlaid atop its secular basis. And though these spiritual elements persisted over the millennia spent in exile, they effectively functioned to maintain the Jewish national identity over the generations by theologizing its national characteristics. Cooper himself discusses at some length how rituals like circumcision function to differentiate the group from the nations it found itself dispersed among, and correctly characterizes much of the Old Testament as an instruction manual for the preservation of identity while in exile. And that preservation of Jewish identity was maintained even in the face of immense pressure to assimilate. The burnings, inquisitions, pogroms, and second-class citizenship that had characterized Jewish life in exile could all have been avoided had the Jews only abandoned their national identity through conversion to the dominant faiths, which, unlike Judaism, are international in character. Unlike Christianity or Islam, which spread across many nations, Judaism's identity has always been tied to the land of Israel, even while in exile. There's also the fact that it is incredibly exclusionary.
I just want to say one thing. It's like he keeps saying this as if the Jews were not in exile. There were Jews in Palestine from the very beginning. And like when the Jews migrated to the Ottoman Empire, why didn't they all go to Palestine or Jerusalem? They weren't forced. I don't understand. They could have gone to Jerusalem at any time. There were still Jews there. There were no migration restrictions in the Ottoman Empire. When the Jews left Spain, they settled in Morocco, Algeria, Constantinople, Syria, other places, and they just made a home for themselves. There were no borders. It was one empire. They could have, if they really wanted to maintain their national homeland, which is just Palestine, in the eyes of the Zionists, they were free to do so at any time. And apparently for thousands of years, they had just kept sending money there for no reason at all. And yet they chose of their own free will to remain in Morocco or Constantinople or Syria and not be in the territory of Palestine, when they were free to do so throughout the entire Muslim world. I don't know the situation in Eastern Europe or Western Europe in general, or why the Jews didn't leave. But all the Jews in the Muslim world could have gone to Palestine and lived as Jews in Palestine, and yet many of them didn't. So it wasn't really, at least for the Mizrahi Jews, I guess this was not really a priority. And this was something that only the Ashkenazi Jews came up with. Who would have thought? And I wonder what King Crocoduck is. Is he a Mizrahi or an Ashkenazi? I think the answer is pretty obvious.
Yeah, pretty obvious. Right, so, and during that time, the Jews who held on to who they were, subordinated as they were, they still retained their material connection to the land of Israel by sending money to the Jews still living in the conquered homeland. This connection was maintained throughout the ages, the diasporic Jews continuing to cling to their identity. They endured humiliation and mass slaughter for countless generations, holding on to the hope that someday, somehow, God would deliver them to their promised land once more. But as the centuries stretched onwards into millennia, the diaspora grew more scattered to the corners of the earth. That day never came. God remained silent. The Jewish national identity modernizes. Enter the Enlightenment, which took Europe by storm. The Jews living in exile had, by and large, split into the religious and the atheistic. Those who had abandoned their national identity through conversion were no longer Jews. An argument can be made, though I won't press it here, that those who'd abandoned their national identity for the adoption of anti-nationalist ideologies like communism also ceased to be Jews. I beg to differ. In the age of the Enlightenment,
that doesn't even make sense, because Judaism is not an ideology. In his own words, Judaism is not an ideology.
But also, if you convert to Christianity, you're abandoning the ideology.
No, exactly. And in the age of Enlightenment, the separability of church and state became an essential feature of modern national identities. This has remained a fixture of the then new ideology of nationalism. That's debatable, whether nationalism is new. Because this whole article, he's almost saying, no, nationalism isn't new. Jews have always had a national identity. What are you talking about?
We've always been nationalists.
So, and again, it's almost like, Israel has the right to exist because the Jewish national identity has existed since the beginning of time, whereas, all these other nations in the world, they're much younger. And so how dare you deny the oldest nation in the world be allowed its own statehood?
Yeah, don't you understand? We had to pay taxes to the government for 100 years. So literally, most oppressed people ever, so we're owed everything. Just accept it.
Right. Many former monarchies and theocracies witnessed their transformation into modern secular nation-states, reflecting the ongoing evolution of national identity through the ages. The Jewish national identity had already undergone a number of changes in its own history, from its monolatric origins in Canaanite religion to its monotheistic innovation under King Josiah during the 7th century CE, from its Hellenization circa 400 BC to its Rabbinization circa 200 CE. As with other nations of the 18th and 19th centuries, the Jewish national identity would ultimately undergo a parallel form of modernization, aligning it with the conceptions put forth by nationalist ideology. The name of the movement that was ultimately responsible for modernizing the Jewish national identity is Zionism. It should come as no surprise that the initial Zionists were atheists. Many supported socialism and nearly all were romantic idealists. Unlike their religious counterparts who took seriously the rabbinic injunction not to re-establish a Jewish nation in the Holy Land until the arrival of the Messiah, the Zionists grew tired of the silence of God and decided to take matters into their own hands. Their arguments for the establishment of a modern nation-state rested not on theological reference to the chosen people trope, an innuendo that Cooper bizarrely slips into his series early on, but rather upon secular Enlightenment notions of national revival. The material and ideological connection to the historic homeland, maintained over 2 millennia, was the justification for the Zionist enterprise, and thus the program proceeded in earnest. Jews from around the world, from Yemen to Europe, mass immigrated from 1882 to 1948. They departed for the territory that their ancestors had prayed for a return to, and whose holidays and traditions they had maintained across countless generations. They ascended to that place which their families had, even in the destitute and miserable conditions inflicted upon them in foreign lands that distrusted and despised them. Materially contributed to via what meagre charity their ghetto communities could scrounge, they returned to that home which their national identity was tied to and which their ancestors never gave up, even though doing so would have spared them and their descendants from bottomless depths of humiliation and torment, from pogroms and genocide. And upon arriving at the promised house, these intruders, who had never lost their spiritual or material connection to it, got to work rebuilding it. But even if this part of Cooper's analogy was wrong, what about the rest? Should we just ignore the fact that the house was already occupied? How could the original inhabitants, who we will no longer call intruders, justify their siege over property that now belonged to somebody else? Well, that's the third assumption of Palestinian historiography. Let's proceed to address it. And so that's the end of his analysis of Cooper's second point. So we've been going for about 2 hours, so I think we're going to wrap this up now. We'll probably do a follow-up because, God, what a rabbit hole this has been.
For sure. This is going to take some time. This needs some, we need.
As with everything with the tribe, there's nothing that's abridged.
No, that was not abridged at all. But we'll definitely pick this up again. God, what was I gonna say? He keeps a continuous trend in this entire article. He is obviously an Ashkenazi. Obviously so, and apparently, the experience of the Arab Jews, or the Sephardic Jews, or the Ethiopian Jews, apparently they've all had the same experience. They've all been pogromed, they've all been oppressed their entire lives, they've all been denied a national identity. Their religious services have been oppressed. Apparently, this has been their entire experience of Jews everywhere around the world, regardless of region, territory, or government. This is just the universal experience of Jews. And it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. There's only one problem group when it comes to the Jews, and it's the Ashkenazis. No one else had a problem with the Mizrahis, or the Sephardics, or the Ethiopian Jews, or the Khazars. I mean, the Khazars are debatable, but still.
I mean, for Benjamin in the chat, we should have given them Madagascar. Yep, that was
honestly that was the best idea.
Yep, yeah.
The poor natives of Madagascar.
Actually, we were here first, though. Have you not heard about my stupid intruder house analogy? That applies everywhere. Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, by that logic, I mean, you sent me a video the other week, Hunger, and it was of this the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, who was a Palestinian sympathizer, and he was at the the ruins
Baalbek.
Baalbek in Lebanon, and because there's like a really ancient temple there, and and he was just talking, and he just said, I'm Scottish, and they're Celtic people. The Celts used to control like most of Western Europe, or occupied most of Western Europe anyway, from Britain, France, Switzerland, Spain, and now they're only really in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and like Brittany. It's like by Israel's logic, all of the Celts should just like rise up in like a furor Celticus and just like go on like a massive crusade to reconquer their lost territory. It's absurd.
No. They should immigrate to the south of Spain, as all tourists do, and establish a Scottish homeland in the territory of, I don't know, Granada, because that's where their ancestors ruled 2,000 years ago.
No, they should all just relocate to northern Italy, because that was Cisalpine Gaul, as the Romans called it. It's the Celtic part of Italy, like return
to Med.
Is there any final comments you want to make, A, before we wrap up?
No, just like it's endless projection from this guy, and I love his double speak and his use of the boomer truth narrative. Especially from an Americanized audience here, because his people had to pay taxes, apparently. So there you go. That's all I really have to say about him.
It's good to remind yourself, because sometimes, like, I'm guilty of this as well. Like, you can get caught in a bubble where you don't really, like, with any, like, with shit libs. If it wasn't for Twitter, I wouldn't see shit libs in my entire, like, life, or even online persona. But it's like, when you actually read them in their own words, you understand why you believe the things you believe, and why this stuff is retarded. It's just good to hear your enemies, speak openly in their own words about what they actually believe.
No, certainly. Well, thank you both, and so next week I'm not sure what the topic will be, unless you two are free to carry this on next week.
I'm free.
I'll make time.
What, you're both free?
Yeah, I'll make time.
Yeah, I'll make
excellent.
Time
This is too good.
I love the tribe. I love talking about them.
Well, I've got one final word about King Crocoduck.
Nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
And thank you everybody for watching, and see you all next week.